Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for coming. Tonight, we start again with being grateful. Our first gratitude goes to all of those who've gone before us and cleared our path. And we certainly keep in mind all of the Native Americans, but especially the Duwamish, upon whose land we stand, and who, again, are still fighting the fight to be acknowledged as a tribe. They tried once or twice with our Congress, and they said, you don't own any land. So then someone gifted them land, and then they built a wonderful longhouse, and still the answer isn't there. So again, we keep them special in our hearts. And so this evening, Susan Platt has brought us a wonderful program, and I'll let Susan come up and introduce her. Susan?
Number one mic. That sounds good. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, everybody. I am very happy to introduce Malu Chavez, the Executive Director of the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project. I've been a donor and a supporter of this group for many, many years. The previous director, Jorge Barron, was extraordinary, and Malu is also. She's the first immigrant woman of color to serve as Executive Director of Northwest Immigrant Rights Project. It's a nationally recognized legal services organization in Washington State dedicated to advancing and defending the rights of immigrants with low or no income through direct legal services, systemic advocacy, and community education. So they have those three different goals that intersect and support the immigrants. So I'm going to stop there. I won't give you the whole history of NIRP because you're going to say something, and I will welcome Malu. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everyone. It's great to be here. As Susan mentioned, my name is Malu Chavez, and I've been part of Northwest Immigrant Rights Project for close to 18 years. I first started as an intern, and then slowly made my way up, although being in the executive director role was never the plan. My plan was always to give back and take all the cases that I could. But I did become NIRP's first deputy director, and I was in that role for 5 years, working alongside our former executive director, Jorge Barron. And when he decided to step down, someone needed to step up. And he made sure that I knew that he thought I could do it. And so for me, he is a great mentor and someone who has always said, you have to keep going and you can do things. And here I am. A little bit about Northwest Immigrant Rights Project. For those of you who may be familiar, let me just go back a little. We were founded about 42 years ago. And we are one of the largest organizations in the Western United States, although sometimes we think we are the largest in the country. We have many partners across the country who are doing similar work, but in Washington State, we are definitely the largest. And all of our services are free of charge. And I'll tell you a little bit about how that can be, because most organizations have to think about charging for their services in order to survive and be able to provide those services. But we're very fortunate that our revenue is mixed. About 60% of our revenue comes from government, local, state, and federal funding. Federal funding, we get 20%. The rest of it is King County, City of Seattle, City of Tacoma, Washington State. And then beyond that, we get a lot of individual contributions, a lot of grants and contracts that are privately funded. One of our largest funders is the Legal Foundation of Washington. For those of you who may be familiar, they receive funding from the interest of the lawyer's interest rate. So IOLTA, for those of you who are attorneys, may know that term. And so we have been very fortunate to say that all of our services are free of charge. How did we get started? 42 years ago, I got the pleasure of meeting Anna earlier, who mentioned how she was familiar with the organization in the 1990s. At that time, in 1984, what communities started seeing here in Washington State, especially in Seattle, is a large number of community members from Central American countries who were coming to the U.S. seeking asylum. Unfortunately, at that time, they were experiencing large numbers of deportation. And so community members got together, lawyers, social workers, interpreters, community members, faith-based leaders, and they're like, we have to do something about this. And the project was formed. It was the Joint Legal Task Force for Central American Refugees. Eventually, other projects started coming up, and there was a merger that made who we are now, Northwest Immigrant Rights Project, in early 1990s. Our focus has always been primarily legal services. That is what we call our bread and butter. So we do this by taking on cases for full direct representation, to say that we are on the case through the duration of the case. Sometimes that takes 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. The longest case I've had the privilege of working with lasted 12 years. And we had to keep going back and forth. The person was in detention for almost 3 years in immigration jail. Eventually, he was released. He was ordered deported. Then we appealed, and then we moved to the Ninth Circuit and got back to the Board of Immigration Appeals, and eventually was remanded back to the Immigration Court. He was granted status, became a green card holder, and now I believe he's now a U.S. citizen. So all of that is just one example to tell you the level of work that we do. But beyond the brief legal services or full direct representation, we also do legal clinics, a lot of workshops with community members. Beyond the services, we focus on what we call systemic advocacy. For those of you who are familiar, systemic advocacy includes impact litigation. And so what does that mean? Sometimes we sue the government, and we sue the government to defend and advance immigrant rights. Because of our direct legal services, we're able to know or identify trends, what we're seeing, what our communities are experiencing. One example I'll tell you. In late 2024, immigration judges out of the Tacoma Detention Center, for those of you who may be familiar, the Tacoma Detention Center is one of the largest immigration jails in the country with capacity of 1,575 people. In January 2025, there were about 700 people detained. A little into 2025, by March or April, there were already 1,500 people. And we know, as we know, this federal administration has a stated goal of mass detention, mass deportation. And so the immigration judges started what we call a misinterpretation of the statute or of the law, started denying what's called bond hearings for people who are detained. So essentially, they were not given an opportunity to request bail, to be able to get out of jail and pursue their case outside of Tacoma. And instead, they were denied due to the manner of their entry. And so if someone entered the country without being inspected, so without admission, the judges were incorrectly misinterpreting this statute. And so in March 2025, we filed a lawsuit, a class action lawsuit out of Tacoma, to say that everyone similarly situated in Tacoma should be allowed the opportunity, not that they would get bond, but they should be allowed the opportunity to pursue bond relief. In July, the Department of Homeland Security said, actually, what the judges are doing in Tacoma, this should be made a nationwide directive. And they did that. Nationwide, now everyone who was, again, not admitted or not inspected was subject to this misinterpretation across the country. And so in July 2025, we filed a nationwide class action. And now this impacted everyone across the country in detention jails, right? Immigration jails, who again were being subjected to this misinterpretation of the law. In September, we won the Tacoma lawsuit. In November, we won the nationwide lawsuit. But guess what? How many of you know that immigration judges are under the Department of Justice, right? And who is the head of the Department of Justice? The U.S. Attorney General, right? And so there was a directive that said, disregard all these laws, essentially, right? Because the federal district court said, this is unlawful, you have to allow that opportunity. But the judges were being told by the Department of Justice not to follow those laws. There was another case that's, to them, set precedent out of the Board of Immigration Appeals. Eventually, that case is no longer, but we're still here. And guess what we had to do? And this is part of our impact litigation work. Because the judges were not letting people out on bond, we started filing what's called habeas petitions in the Ninth Circuit to say that either the person or group of people should be released because their detention was unlawful, given these two rulings. And so since September, we've had to file about 10 to 20 habeas petitions for people who are detained in Tacoma. That's about more than 300 now. And we're fortunate that most people are being allowed out. But we would not have been able to do this had we not been taking those cases to begin with through our direct legal services, what we call our bread and butter. So that's one example of systemic advocacy through impact litigation. We also do what's called legislative advocacy. We just ended legislative session, for those of you who are familiar. And then we also work with our congressional representative because, as you know, immigration law is federal law. And so we have to keep doing that work and work collaboratively to make changes. I do want to say that we are a statewide organization. Thank you. I'll leave it here for a second. But for background, our clients in 2025 came from over 140 countries, 148 to be exact. And they speak collectively 81 languages. Our staff internally speak close to 30 languages. So we're not even close to the 81. But currently, our staff, we have a staff of 205 people, about 109 attorneys. And beyond our legal staff, we have a network of pro bono attorneys who are showing up for clients and taking on direct representation. This number that you see here, that NIRP, or Northwest Immigrant Rights Project, served about 40,600 people, that includes our community education. Everyone look at each other in the room. You are part of our community education. Just for context, in 2024, we reached 7,400 people, but guess how many we reached in 2025, if you do the math? About 25,400, so more than tripled over the year. And that tells you something. I know I mentioned that the federal administration right now has a stated goal of mass detention, mass deportation. There's one unstated goal that we all have seen, is that they want us to quit. And guess what? We're not going to do that. We have so many amazing partners. We also have a mission and vision that we follow. Of course, our mission is to promote justice by defending and advancing immigrant rights. And we do this through these three pillars that Susan mentioned: direct legal services, systemic advocacy, and community education. And our vision for the world of course, without it being stated here, is to not exist. But that's not going to happen anytime soon. And so we strive for justice and equity for all persons, regardless of where they were born. In 2013, we established what we call our set of values. And if you have time, I invite you to go through our website and look at these: dignity, fairness, solidarity, self-determination, safety, and inclusion. So what do we do? What is the direct legal services? We work with people who are trying to reunite with their families, with their loved ones. And of course, immigration law is very complex. So a U.S. citizen or a lawful permanent resident can petition for certain family members, not everyone. If you're a U.S. citizen, you can petition for your spouse, your children, and your parents. If you're a lawful permanent resident, you can only petition for your unmarried children and your spouse. U.S. citizens can also petition for siblings, and it doesn't matter if the sibling is married. But so that's the kind of thing that we do in terms of our work through family members. We also work with people who are seeking asylum, other people who are seeking what's called humanitarian protections. They have suffered a crime and are being collaborative with the investigation. They may be unaccompanied children crossing the border on their own, and so are seeking what's called special immigrant juvenile classification. These are for children who cannot be reunited with one parent or both due to abandonment, neglect, abuse, or something similar. And so the other things that we do is work with green card holders to become naturalized citizens. We also help people get or obtain temporary protections. Of course, some of those are going away with this administration, like temporary protected status for people coming from countries where they're unable to return due to a civil conflict or natural disaster. However, the majority of our work right now, we can do all of this, but a lot of it is through deportation defense. And so many of you have seen stories or articles in the news about people getting pulled over, getting detained, about people being found at their homes or at work sites. Of course, in the Seattle, Washington area, it is nothing compared to what we've seen in Wisconsin, in LA, Chicago, New Orleans, DC. It doesn't feel like it, but I can tell you, just from that number that I gave you earlier, 700 people detained in January 2025 to about 1,500 in around March or April. We have stayed around 1,500 since. And guess what? Some of our community members are being transferred to other detention centers across the country. And one thing that we are making sure that we plan for, unfortunately, is the possibility that we could see something like Minneapolis in Seattle or in neighboring cities. I know that this is scary to think about. At the same time, while there's so much fear and despair in our communities, there's also a lot of hope with community members at large coming together and planning. Some organizations are being so nimble that they're starting to think, what can I do differently in the event that this happened? And so, for example, mutual aid organizations, neighborhood groups are coming up. I'll tell you one story. Last week, I was giving a presentation and I had just gotten a text message telling me that someone's sister had been stopped at a gas station. And guess what? She called her brother, and her brother gathered all the neighbors, and everyone showed up. And when ICE was there, they let her go because there were so many people calling for her release. But she now has an appointment letter, and she needs to show up on her own. And so community members are doing something that's called accompaniment. For those of you who may be familiar, they show up with the community member to their ICE appointments, to their interviews with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, to their court hearings. This is just impressive. Another example, and I'll move on more quickly. is that last year in May 2025, we started to see immigration officers show up to immigration court. And that had never happened. Here you are, a person who's trying to do the right thing, right? Show up to your immigration court hearing, defend your status, try to get a lawyer. And what was happening at the time, the government attorneys were moving to dismiss the cases. And what did that mean? If the case got dismissed, that meant that the immigration judge or the immigration court no longer had jurisdiction. And so ICE was outside waiting for the person because the court no longer had jurisdiction. Now the jurisdiction was ICE's jurisdiction. And so we saw a lot of community members getting detained at immigration court when their cases were being dismissed. All of them were sent, most of them at least, were sent to Tacoma. In Tacoma, we have our team. One thing that I failed to mention is that while our work is statewide, we only have 4 offices. One in Granger, which is in Yakima County, one in Wenatchee in Chelan County, one in Tacoma, Pierce County, and one in Seattle. But we do this work for everyone in Washington State. And of course, our impact goes beyond Washington because of our impact litigation across the country. We also have what we call the social services team. In 2019, ahead of the pandemic, we started realizing that our clients, when they walk through our doors, it's not just their immigration status that they're worried about. It's food insecurity, housing instability, getting a job, all these different needs that we all have, right, besides our immigration status. And so we established the social services team so that our legal team can do the legal work and that the social team can start connecting community to those services. Here we are, all the 4 offices. You're going to get a copy of this slide. If you know someone who may benefit, please feel free to connect them. We also have the ability to connect with loved ones of people who end up getting detained in Tacoma. And so there are resources on our website, but we also have a direct contact where people can communicate with us. If someone is detained, there's a process to find them. But one thing that we know is that things are not getting updated as quickly as we want them to. And so someone can be detained today, and we may not know where they are until maybe the next day or the following. But again, if you're in Washington State, most people are being detained out of Tacoma if they don't get transferred. There are some facilities that we talked about earlier with some of you, a family detention facility in Dilley, Texas. Some of you may have heard this, where they're detaining family units. Washington State, in Tacoma, you have to be at least 18 years old. And so if you're younger than 18, there are youth-specific facilities, but most people who are with their parents, most children who are with their parents get sent to other states. We talk about keeping up to date because if someone doesn't show up to their immigration hearing, they may get ordered in absentia or order removed in their absence. And that's going to create more trouble because now ICE will say, now you've gone through the process and now it's our turn to find you. And so a lot of people are being essentially found this way because they're so afraid to show up to immigration court or their interview appointments. That's why accompaniment is important. But when they don't show up, they run the risk of being detained otherwise. We do have to tell our communities how to plan. One of our partners is the Legal Council for Youth and Children. They are providing virtual statewide appointments for people who have children who are minor children to start planning ahead and put together a safety plan. What might happen if the parent gets detained who's going to pick up the child from school. Ensuring that they're updating their contact information with their doctors at the schools. Is there a neighbor or a loved one who can take care of the child in the event that the person becomes detained? And something that we are seeing is some community members are having to make very difficult decisions about foregoing even planning. Some of them are having to make the decisions to leave everything behind and take their families and leave the country. Some of you may have seen this in the news. There was a family who left with their 2 children, and they had been living here for decades. The mother is U.S. Born, and her husband was, I believe, a Mexican citizen. They decided to leave instead of having the possibility of being separated indefinitely. And remember, the thing about bonds, some people may be detained indefinitely too, right? So that's the risk that people are having to calculate. Are they willing to stay together or run the risk to be separated? One thing that I want to say is what we're seeing is around large-scale enforcement action. I mentioned around what happened in Minneapolis. We are working in partnership with community members, with community partners as well, organizations. And so we have trained attorneys to be part of what we call the legal response team. And so we rely on the collaboration of partner organizations who are going to let us know that there is a possible large-scale enforcement action or a large-scale raid. If that happens where more than 10 people, at least 10 people are impacted, then they can communicate with us directly and we would activate our legal team. And this includes our legal staff, but also our volunteers. And the goal is to try to minimize the impact as much as we can. But some of you may have heard that we've had 2 large-scale raids already, one in Bellingham and one in Kent. And these were work site raids, about 17 at each site. It happened early in the morning, 7:30, around that time. By the time someone showed up, the people impacted had already been detained. And again, where do they get taken? Tacoma. And so a lot of the work happens behind the scenes where we can go in and visit them. But guess what? For 1,500 people who are detained, there are only 7 interview rooms. And at least 2 of those are being used for virtual hearings with judges outside of Tacoma. At least 2 of those are being used for virtual appointments for attorneys who are not in the area. And so that leaves us with 2 or 3 for in-person appointments. And so our staff are there Monday through Thursday with appointments, Friday for emergencies, and the rest of the time, they're having to meet their clients at 6 in the morning, 9 p.m., weekends, so that they can be seen, right? So that the people can be seen. And so this is kind of the collaboration we're seeing. Some of the work that we've been doing around community education is having monthly webinars. So those of you who are interested, please join us. We have one coming up March 26th. For those of you who are interested, again, the slides will be shared. So, what is enforcement escalation? And I want to make sure I leave some time for questions, so I'll go for another 10 minutes. Is that good? 15 minutes? So what is enforcement escalation? And this is where I switch. The first few slides was introductory. Now let's get into the weeds almost. Why do we have enforcement escalation? Let's understand who we're talking about. In the past, we used to, or at least I used to when I gave this presentation, is to almost separate U.S. citizens from non-citizens. Like, think of an invisible line in between U.S. citizens and non-citizens. Nowadays, that doesn't matter because we're seeing a lot of community members impacted because of the color of their skin, their accent, the language they speak, the work that they do as factors to be arrested for, right? Or to be pursued. But who are U.S. citizens? You're either born in the U.S. or you naturalized because you got a green card first and then you waited your time to be naturalized, or you acquired or derived citizenship from your grandparents or your parents who lived in the U.S. as U.S. citizens. Then we have non-citizens, so green card holders are lawful permanent residents. We have people with asylum or refugee status. We have people with temporary legal status, including DACA recipients, right? Those are protected statuses. It doesn't mean that there's a pathway to get a green card there, but they have protected status. And then we have people who are considered undocumented. Many people came with visas and overstayed. Many people changed their status. Some people came without permission or without inspection. One takeaway from this slide is that immigration status is fluid. You may have met someone 2 years ago without status, and they may have immigration status today. You also could have met someone who was a green card holder 2 years ago, and unfortunately, they went through the immigration deportation process and are no longer in the US because they were deported. And so there are so many different ways that community members exist in terms of what is immigration status. So now, one thing about deportation proceedings is that the law permits the federal government to arrest certain people, so certain immigrants, and place them in deportation proceedings, or what's called removal proceedings. And this includes any person who's undocumented, but also people with legal status, with lawful status, but there has to be a reason. And sometimes these are reasons like there might be a criminal conviction or offense. But do you remember the students out of Columbia University? They had status. There had been no crime, but freedom of speech was impacted, right? So they had done something that placed them at risk of deportation. And so this is evolving. This way to think about who gets placed in deportation proceedings. More than 60% of the people who have been detained have no criminal history. But one thing to keep in mind out of this slide for everyone is that regardless of your immigration status, we all have protections under the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which protects us against unreasonable searches and seizures. And this is too much information, but for those of you who may be interested, an immigration agent must have reasonable suspicion, right? But remember what I mentioned earlier about certain factors that could be relevant. This was a Supreme Court justice's comment. It was not a ruling. It was not an opinion. It was just his comment to say that certain factors could be taken into account. But reasonable suspicion has to be more than a guess or a presumption. So the person's skin color is not enough, right? And we know that racial profiling is unconstitutional. And so to arrest someone, probable cause is required. There needs to be enough evidence or information. And that's why knowing our rights is important. The right to remain silent, the right to want to speak to a lawyer before you answer any questions, right? The right to not allow unreasonable searches and seizures. So, what does the process look like for people when they are placed in deportation proceedings? The first question is the person subject to deportation? So, two things. If the person doesn't have current status, can they be admissible? If the government is arguing they're actually inadmissible, so not admissible, they can pursue this. If the person has status, the government has to has the burden of proof to show that they may be deportable, that there's a reason why they need to be removed or taken their status away. And so if that happens, people get something called a charging document, saying the reasons why they're being placed in proceedings. And so here's where we come in. Does the person have a defense? Can we fight for them to stay in the country with their loved ones, with their communities? So what is the defense? Those things that I talked about at the beginning. Do they have a qualifying family member? Are they a survivor of violence? Are they seeking asylum? Do they have a protection, right? Those are defenses. Right now, what we're seeing is how people are ending up in removal proceedings. We talked about people being identified by ICE or stopped by ICE. We know that there are people being detained at the border. In other states, local law enforcement is acting as federal immigration enforcement. We don't have that in Washington state because of an act called Keep Washington Working Act that was passed in 2019. However, this is around civil immigration enforcement. If there is an investigation related to a crime committed, then there is collaboration allowed. But in 2025, I mentioned that people are getting arrested at their interviews or earlier at their court hearings. And then people who file for protection sometimes are getting denied and placed in deportation proceedings. In Washington, we have two courts. I've been talking a lot about the Tacoma Immigration Court. That's for people who are detained. But people who are not detained, so they're allowed to continue with their lives, they just have to show up to immigration court, right, to defend their status. That's called the non-detained docket. Guess how many cases there are in Washington state? 5,000. Actually, 50,000. And guess how many people are unrepresented, so no attorneys? 28,000 of them. And so when people come to our office seeking services, remember we have that ability to provide services for free, but we do go through an income eligibility because we're trying to help as many people as we can who can't afford private attorneys. And so generally in immigration practice, there is no right to a government appointed counsel. There's one way that people get a government appointed counsel, and that's a lawsuit we brought in the early 2000s that says if a person is mentally unable to proceed on their own because they have a mental incapacity, then they should be appointed government counsel. And we won that lawsuit. And so that's one group of people who can get government attorneys nationwide, across the country. There was one other way, or there is currently, but this is currently being threatened. And this is not appointment, but attorneys get paid by the federal government to represent unaccompanied children and youth. So remember we talked about children and youth crossing the border on their own? Well, when they cross on their own, guess what? They get detained in the Office of Refugee Resettlement. Then they get released. And eventually, they find their ways to organizations like ours who get money from the government. We currently get $3.5 million to help unaccompanied children and youth. That was ended, or it was terminated last year. We filed the lawsuit as NERP as one of the plaintiffs. The money came back, but we run the risk of losing it again. So currently, the government said, we're going to give it to you every 3 months. And so we got the funding, and it was set to expire January 31st. And we learned that we were going to get another 3 months. Guess when? January 30th. And so that's what they expect, right? For us to be able to afford continuing services. We are very fortunate with the support that we get, but many of our partner organizations are struggling, and some of them are having to end services because they can't go 3 months at a time. And so we're very fortunate that our board has set reserves aside so that we can continue the work. And so if you don't have that government appointed counsel because of your mental capacity, or you don't get a paid government, a paid attorney paid by the government because you're an unaccompanied youth, many people are forced to represent themselves on their own if they cannot afford a private attorney. And in detention, someone is 10.5 times more likely to succeed in their case, if they're represented. And so that makes the difference. We have heard of many different ways that the administration is going through changes. My presentation is called Defending Immigrant Rights in a Shifting Legal Landscape, because a lot of it is shifting. A lot of it is changing. Immigration protections are ending. Changes in the practice of law is happening. And so it used to be that we could tell clients, here's what should happen. You're going to do this, and then it's going to happen, and then this is going to happen. Now we're also learning, because this is what should happen, but that's not necessarily what's going to happen. And so there's a lot of changes that we're having to experience as well. These are just lists of different things that our communities are having to go through. There's a new naturalization civics test. There is interagency collaboration. There's data sharing. HUD announced the Housing Authority Department announced a rule that says for people who are in mixed immigration status, they're not going to be able to get subsidy for housing anymore if this rule passes. What does that mean, mixed status family? There's at least one undocumented person in the family, and often is one of the parents. And so if one of the parents is not able to get this subsidy, then the rest of the family is not able to live there together, right? And so some families are going to have to split up or no longer receive that service or funding so that they can stay together. And I've talked to other partners, community partners, who have said that they're seeing an increase in the number of families living houseless in their cars. And that's what's happening essentially. What I said earlier about the unstated intent about how they want us to quit, it's across sectors. It's not just immigration related, right? And so that's how our communities are being impacted. I did have a slide just so that you have an idea. And this is just me thinking the different ways people are impacted besides the hostility and immigration enforcement. There's higher levels of fear. There's criminalization, bullying, racism, discrimination. Think about the children's fears and how they manifest in different ways, their behaviors. We have heard of families where the breadwinner is deported or detained, and the oldest child has to take on the role of the primary caretaker. Often teenagers are having to find jobs to be able to support the families. And so much more. Of course, there's no room for all the different ways. But what we tell community members is to remember the protections that there are in Washington State. I mentioned the Keep Washington Working Act. There's also something called Courts Open to All. This is not related to immigration. This is family court hearing or a domestic violence protection order or something else that someone can go to court and be protected. So state resources cannot be used for the collaboration of civil immigration enforcement. And then last year, there is an expansion of paid sick leave. And when we think about who could benefit, a lot of us are impacted, right? We have family members, we have staff, we have friends whose loved ones are going through the process. This is important protections. This legislative session, many amazing bills were introduced. So I'm sure you'll start seeing the different updates. In the meantime, we go through different ways that impacted community members can protect themselves. I talked about the safety planning. I talked about know your rights. There's something called a defense plan. Where are your documents saved? If you need your children's passports, where are they? Who has access to the keys? Who's going to pay the mortgage? Who's going to access the bank account, right? All these different things to think about are as a defense plan. We have resources here. The other thing is that we need support and we need to join groups that can support us. And so here are some ways. And so for people who care, what are the things that you can do? Of course, in the midst of all the fear, we do have to stay calm and think about, okay, let's plan. Let's be proactive in how we help community members. We also need to know our own legal rights, right? And offering help can look different. And then if you are a witness to an enforcement action, how can you document? How can you record safely? Discussing how to keep your workplace safe, sharing resources. And then there's also something called the Belonging Handbook that some organizations created. And these are ways to think about belonging, who all gets to belong. And then for those of you who may be interested in, are there other organizations like Northwest Immigrant Rights Project? Here we are. There's a nonprofit or low-cost immigration attorneys directory. Of course, in Washington State, there are other groups who provide legal services like NERP, but definitely not in those three ways that I mentioned. And then for people who can afford attorneys, there's the Association of American Immigration Lawyers. This is it for me. I invite you to reach out anytime, questions, follow-ups. Feel free to reach me, and I'm here to answer any questions. Thank you so much.
I'll do that one.
So, questions for Malu, from anyone?
I have a question. One of your last slides referred to a red card. I think everybody knows about green cards. What the heck is a red
Well,
card?
thank you so much for asking. So the red card is a know your rights information. So pass out or order or print red cards to have at your workplace or for you to carry around. It's just know your rights printed in various languages. One thing about know your rights or asserting our rights is that it can happen in any language. And so that must be respected by the federal agents. Of course, we know that that's not necessarily happening right now. But it's important that we assert our rights because if there is someone else documenting or recording, video recording, then that can help as evidence that the arrest was unlawful. And then we as attorneys can move to suppress that evidence or end or terminate that immigration case. And so it's important to have those, and the red cards just provide know your rights information. Thank you. Oh, yes.
I have. What do you think is the really? Oh, sorry.
Is it on?
I hear my. What do you think? There we go. What do you think the real point of this detention is? In other words, why are they bothering to detain people?
Well, I think one thing, as the stated goal is mass detention, mass deportation, is to get to the numbers. And so to get people, there are quotas. There are daily quotas, right? 3,000
The point is to deport. Why not just deport?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, and I can get political about it, but there are people who are benefiting, right? So immigration jails are private detentions, and who's benefiting? Certain corporations. And so there is a money-making goal here, unfortunately, beyond the human impact and the needs. It's real. Yeah, thank you.
The Indians were here before we were.
Yeah, yep.
How can the government just rip it in and take people who are Native Americans
Yeah.
and export them?
Yeah. And we have heard of those situations, right? Native American community members, one in Redmond, one near Bellingham, I believe, and others in the southern border are being detained. Many brown people look similar, right? And so when you have a Supreme Court justice saying that these could be relevant factors, the skin color, the way you look, right? The jobs that you are working. Unfortunately, the training is not there for immigration officers. And so a lot of people get caught up, including US citizens who are brown or black. Yeah.
You mentioned a situation where some people will go in with someone who has a hearing that neighbors join. Is there a place where you can register to say, I'll be happy to go with anybody who's going in for an extension or part of their hearing and accompany that person?
Yes, absolutely. We are partnering with an organization that's called Jewish Immigrant, JCIJ, Jewish Coalition for Immigrant Justice, JCIJ. And I will email that to Susan so that we can pass it around. But JCIJ has a training for accompaniment and you can sign up through them. Thank you.
I have somebody here.
Oh, yeah.
The federal government is attempting to buy up warehouses to house up to 10,000 people. I haven't heard whether they have actually been successful in getting property and are beginning to open those facilities.
Thank you. There was the one in Florida, right? I think it was 6,000 people. That one, I think, was shut down eventually. The conditions were so bad, and of course, congressional representatives have that right to show up and visit. They were not being allowed. I do know that there are hundreds and hundreds of more detention facilities across the country than there were back in 2024. Not at that level, but there was one, I think, in Georgia that has a max capacity of around above 5,000 at least. We have not heard of the success yet, but that is the plan. Yeah, hi.
If we would want to make a donation, where would we send it? As an immigrant myself, I know what an incredibly important job, service you're providing. You have to be maintained. So I would encourage every one of us to make a donation to this organization.
Thank you so much. Our website has a donate option, so nerp.org. If you want to do it online, it also has our address where you can mail a check if you're interested. Thank you so much. Hi.
Hi. What's the biggest misconception undocumented immigrants have of U.S. immigration law?
Yeah, and I think it goes beyond undocumented immigrants, but the ability to get your status, right? So, for example, this is a myth that just by being in the U.S. for longer than 20 years or 10 years that you can automatically get status. That doesn't happen. The myth that if you're married to a U.S. citizen, you can just apply for your green card. That's also not how it happens necessarily. Also, that paying taxes will help get status. That's also not necessarily. It does help when you're in deportation proceedings, in particular, as a discretionary factor. But that alone is not. And I think that many people who are trying to get their status don't realize that the different obstacles that there are. So one example is There's something called immediate relatives. So if you're a family member of a U.S. citizen or a lawful permanent resident, it depends what category you fall under. U.S. citizens, so spouses, parents, and children under 21 have immediate visas available. By immediate, meaning that they still have to wait the processing time. So like a few months, maybe 2 years, depending on what that is. For non-immediate relatives, you have to wait for the visa bulletin to become updated. So for example, someone from India, the Philippines, Mexico, and China those countries have the longest wait times. And so if you're a child of a U.S. citizen, but you're 21 years old and you happen to be from Mexico, you're gonna wait about 25 years before your visa becomes available. And if you're a sibling of someone from the Philippines, a similar wait time, 20 years also, right? So the myth that you can just do it the right way or get in the back of the line, that is the line for many community members, that they have to wait 25 years before the visa becomes available. Thank you. Oh, yes.
I worked with Indian tribes in the 1980s, and there was an organization called STOW, the Small Tribes of Western Washington. What happened to them, and what role do they play now, if any?
Yeah, and I'm not familiar with STOW, the organization. But I know, speaking generally about the Native American communities, there are doing a lot of know your rights information, especially on the land, the reservations lands, for example. The good thing is, while there's sovereignty that they have, right, state laws still apply in terms of collaboration with ICE. And so many of our neighbors, Native American neighbors, are starting to have this type of education for their own tribal members, right? To know that they could be at risk, to your question earlier. And I think that there's, of course, beyond the fear, there's frustration about why would they not be recognized, right? As not having to go under these immigration laws. And I don't know that this is the case, but I can imagine how all of this puts people into situations where they have to think about themselves and their loved ones first before other community members. And so there's a lot of division potentially around, I'm not an immigrant, I'm not undocumented, why are you going after me? But from my perspective, it should be, why are you going after anyone to begin with, right? Because if you go after me one day, there might be coming after you the next day or something like that, it goes, right? And so I think that there's a lot of conversations happening, a lot of education happening. But to your question about STOW, I am not familiar with them. Yes.
I think all of us live in anxiety about Seattle becoming, entering a situation similar to what was happening in Minnesota. How can we safely document an illegal enforcement event? What is safe for us to do and to be supportive of the person who is the victim?
How to be safe, supportive of the person who's the victim. I think the documenting, the knowing, the salute, the specifics, right? The action, like the L, which law enforcement agency. So like understanding what that stands for, like being observant and documenting is important. And also knowing the distance that you must keep and not interfering with an arrest. But all of that, there are organizations who are collecting this information so that then we can protect our community members. Also joining community groups that are doing some of this support. And in the event that something large scale happens, there are two networks. One is called Free Washington, and the other one is Washington for All. And these are coalitions or networks of many partner organizations, faith-based, labor, immigrant rights, educators who are coming together to think about how the response might be. So at the individual level, there are things that you can do, but also at the large partnership level.
So it would be helpful then to connect with one of those organizations to get more specific information.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
I have a question over here.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
What about having a whistle
Yeah.
when we're out in a phone that we can take pictures of as anything that looks like it's way beyond what's necessary to have a person taken into custody?
Yeah, thank you. And I know that there has been some dialogue about whether whistles are helpful or not. For some incidents, I think they are. I think the making a call to understand if it's really an immigration related enforcement action, right? Because I think that's what we're seeing now. Most likely, you're not going to know who the agency involved is because there are unmarked cars. They're not necessarily wearing specific vests. And so understanding what level of action it is. But whistles are, from my perspective, helpful. And we have heard about lessons learned from Minneapolis and other cities that has been helpful for community members. And some of them do find them, oh, perfect, yes. And some of them do find them loud, and it is loud, but that's the point, right? To make sure that no one is gonna come out and unfortunately inadvertently be detained by ICE.
I have a question also about the people that were on the immediately after the inauguration were released from being convicted as felons and in prison. And I have a theory that they're all working for these organizations. Is there anybody that's done any research on that?
I don't know. I'm not familiar with that. Sorry. Yeah. Oh, it's not. Okay. One more question here.
You gave us an excellent presentation of the end result of migration. On Monday afternoon, the World Concerns Committee is going to give a presentation of migration from ancient times to the present, including to Washington State. This is by David Fenner, Professor David Fenner from the University of Washington School of Jackson School of International Studies. So it should be, again, entertaining as well as very informative. And thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.
May I ask one more question?
Yes.
What percentage, if it were measurable, of your work do you consider kind? And where are the words written? Send me your tired, your poor, your wretched, yearning to be free.
So the percentage of kindness or support that is kind. Well, yeah, in terms of the word kind, yes, 100%. But we do have donated, so kind, right, of kind. We do have donated services, and we also count those hours. So our pro bono attorneys are giving their hours, so we count that.
Good.
And then volunteers. We have volunteers showing up to the immigration courthouse every day, Monday through Friday, to observe the court hearings and document what they're seeing. And that's of kind as well. But I agree, 100%, everything is kind. Thank you.
Thank you.
Malou Chavez, we thank you ever so much. And we know again that this is the tax exempt organization. if you choose to donate. And I would like to close tonight with an Apache blessing. May the sun bring you new energy by day. May the moon softly restore you by the night. May the rain wash away your worries. May the breeze blow new strength into your being. May you walk gently through the world and know its beauty all the days of your life. And again, we thank you for this incredible work you do, and we are so grateful to have you come speak with us and share yourself. Thank you. And thank you for coming, and thank you, Nick, for helping us tonight, and thank you again. Have a wonderful evening.